Welcome to another exciting episode of the NIDS View, a weekly show of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, where we are advancing peace, promoting stability, and helping you to think deterrence. Each week, we will discuss and analyze a recent topic and provide insight to how it affects our national deterrence. The view of the hosts and guests are their own. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to another great episode of the NIDS View, a podcast of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. Of course, I've been gone a little while, so you may have forgotten who I am, but I'm Adam Lowther, along with Jim Petrosky and Curtis McGiffin. Now, I don't know what tall tales and lies Curtis and Jim may have told you in my absence, but I just wanted to tell you that in the past month, I have taken a job in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to help stand up the Saudi version of the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies. And so it's been a transition time, but I'm now back and happy to see Curtis's and Jim's smiling face. So it's good to be here. Now,
we're smiling because you're back, Adam.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
but to be fair, Adam, we didn't tell a whole lot of tall tales about where you have been.
So give some impressions.
Suffice it to say, wrestling with the time change, the time difference between the two countries has been interesting.
Yeah, it's 8 hours from the East Coast and 11 hours from the West Coast. So, when you have things to do back in the States, it's a bit of a challenge. But
yes.
So we've got a great topic. We're going to talk about President Trump's statement and subsequent interviews and the discussion on Capitol Hill and elsewhere about his statement that the United States needs to return to nuclear testing and exactly what that means. And so with that in mind, let me turn to you first, Jim. I know you don't know much about this topic, but I did want to have you read President Trump's statement. I figure that may be kind of the limits of your knowledge on nuclear physics and those kind of things. So if you could at least let us know what President Trump said on Truth Social.
Testing. I thought for sure you said we were going to talk about testing here, Adam. Very good. So just for the audience, if you haven't read my bio, and you can read the short version. The long version's only 2 sentences. The short version's 1. But I have been involved quite a bit with the concept of testing. I've never been to a nuclear explosive test, and I think that's I want to make sure we keep our language clear. And the statement by President Trump was rather interesting. When I heard it, I think Curtis tried to call me. I probably had 6 or 7 people text or email me like 2 minutes later. And so the statement that really got everyone excited, this came straight off of the from the Truth Social, was the quote: "Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately." Close quote. 2 seconds later, I heard rumbling in the background. All these weapon tests were going on. It was amazing how quickly that started happening. No, actually, that isn't what happened. And in fact, I've written a paper. We're going to hopefully get it out here soon, because for people in this audience, that I have talked about testing for many times on this podcast. And I'm going to give you a quick view of my view of testing. But let me just give a little bit of history here. Because nuclear weapons testing, and specifically nuclear weapons explosive testing and critical yield, is really the important part of this. And so we started testing. Of course, we did testing during the Manhattan Project. I'm not going to go back that far. I'm going to get forward to the treaties that are sort of controlling what's happening. There was a limited test ban treaty in 1963. That limited test ban treaty primarily prohibited nuclear test explosions. Notice the word explosion is in there. Prohibited nuclear test explosions in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater, but allowed us to do underground testing. Interesting, they left the word, and that's a quote directly out of the treaty, the word explosive in there, but allowed for underground testing. And the primary reason for that was because of, the problems associated with radiation in the atmosphere. We weren't even doing much in space at the time. And then by 1974, we had a threshold test ban treaty. It limited underground testing to yields no more than 150 kilotons. The primary reason for that is because of venting of radioisotopes into the atmosphere and concerns that there would be, if everyone was testing their weapons in that fashion, that there would be pollution caused by those radioisotopes being placed in the air, and there would be ill effects from that. And then the Peaceful Nuclear Explosion Treaty in 1976. Interestingly, and I wanted to do a podcast on this sometime. I'm going to do a nuclear knowledge on this because we had an incredible program where we were looking at peaceful uses of nuclear weapons. You're like, explosions being peaceful? Well, yes, we looked at possibly making a canal next to the Panama Canal that would be, you wouldn't have to go through locks. It'd be ocean free. We looked at building, I'm actually reading a book called this is not an endorsement, by the way, a book called the Firecracker Boys, where we were going to build a deep water port on the west side of Alaska at one point, and it got nixed for a variety of reasons. It's a great book though to read. But anyway, we were going to do these nuclear tests to build mines and do mining. And then, of course, the treaty on the proliferation of nuclear weapons was in 2017, which prohibits the development, testing, possession, and use of nuclear weapons aiming for complete elimination, which I think Curtis will have a lot to say about complete elimination of nuclear weapons in that. But the reason why I bring that up is all these talk about testing, but they're really talking about explosive nuclear weapon testing. And although I'm not in the minds of the president, and I wasn't on his staff when he put this out, in my belief, that's what he was talking about, is nuclear weapon explosive testing. But I want to add another piece to that. And I highlight in the paper. I'm going to turn it over to Curtis here in a minute. But the real interesting part of that statement is the last part of the first sentence. And I want to read that again. I've instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. To me, equal basis is dynamic parity. They're going to do it. We're going to do it. They control the volume. If they want to up their nuclear testing, whether explosive or non-explosive testing, we'll up our testing on nuclear explosives and non. And if they want to stop it, they can stop it. So that sort of highlights where we are with testing. I'll get back to what kind of tests we're doing, but I know Curtis, I can just see his head bobbing right now. He wants to say something, so go for it, Curtis.
Well,
okay, that's enough. I got more to say.
I hear what you say. I would say that. So I was one of those that called you immediately after I heard the breaking news from the Truth Social posting, and what's interesting in your part, you actually did neglect to read the very beginning of the Truth posting, which was that the president said that the United States has more weapons than any other country, which is maybe not so much depending upon how you count the numbers, but we have a number of intelligence documents that are public, written to Congress, that actually say that Russia has the largest, most dynamic arsenal. And then he goes on to explain, why. And then he said, because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated to do it, but had no choice! Exclamation point. All right. Now he's talking about sort of rebuilding the nuclear enterprise as he's interpreting it. And so we know that President Trump has made several statements in his tenure so far, in his second term here over the last 10 months, about nuclear elimination across the globe, right? So he's come across about as much as a dove as he has a hawk when it comes to nuclear relations. He preaches deterrence, understands deterrence, and the value of a strong military, peace through strength. But what he has also been what he's also been engaged in is this sort of public diplomacy, executing the art of the deal by making these sort of broad statements of, hey, it would be nice if we could get everybody to just get rid of these weapons and these sorts of things, which, by the way, is an impossible task. Impossible. Okay, no matter how much you might hope that it could happen. And so I think this is, some things that are, of course, in my mind, interesting to think about. But I think it starts with just a tad bit of history. We know, of course, that the last nuclear explosive test was by North Korea in 2017. There have been rumors that they're preparing for another one. What I'm bothered by, Jim and Adam, is what are we not being told? What intelligence is the president and his team and others privy to that we are not? But let me take a look at what the history has shown us here. And anybody can go online and look. On June 13th of 2019, then the DIA director, Lieutenant General Ashey, posted, and it's still out there on the DIA website, that he's, quote, the U.S. government, including the intelligence community, has assessed that Russia has conducted nuclear weapons tests and have created nuclear yield. Regarding China, the information raised through various institutes, coupled with China's lack of transparency and on their nuclear testing activities, naturally raise questions about those activities and related to zero-yield nuclear weapons testing moratorium, which is adhered to by the United States, United Kingdom, and France. These are actions that the U.S. government characterizes as inconsistent with the commitments undertaken. So in 2019, the accusation by the current, I don't want to say accusation, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so flippant in my descriptors here, but sort of the statement by the intelligence community, at least one portion of it, stated, hey, there is some testing going on, and that was 6 years ago. General Ashey made a presentation in May, just prior to that official statement, at the Hudson Institute. You can watch this online. And I pulled from the transcript a few interesting things. Of course, he said the United States believes that Russia is probably not adhering to the nuclear testing moratorium in a manner consistent with zero yield, and that they predicted back then over the next decade, China will likely double its size and nuclear stockpile, and had launched more ballistic missiles in 2018 for testing and training than the rest of the world combined. And so testing can be measured in many different ways. He also noted in his presentation that China is possibly preparing to operate its test site, which I believe is Lap Nor or something like that, year round. So this is 6 years ago. And that China continues to use explosive containment chambers at its test site. I'll be interested in your thoughts on that, Jim. That 6 years ago that we were identifying this. And then Russia claims to be developing new warhead designs to include high-yield, earth-penetrating warheads to attack hardened military targets. Again, this is 6 years ago by our intelligence community. And that they are, of course, continuing to modernize automated nuclear command and control systems, including perimeter. So this is not anything new. It shouldn't shock anybody, the fact that it's taken 6 years for the United States to finally say, you know what, maybe we need to start matching and placing, as I have said on this podcast in the past, we must take the fear off of our shoulders and put it back onto their shoulders. And the way to do that is through a dynamic parity, a matching of capability, capacity, and operations in the way that they view as stabilizing.
Adam? I think well, before it goes back to Adam, I just want to say, Curtis, I think it's why people listen to this podcast. We have two people here looking at the same thing, and we both pull out two different things. I wanted to set the record straight on testing, and you wanted to set the record straight on what the adversaries are doing, which is fine. That's the great way to do it. You got to look at both sides of this because the effective deterrence is both sides. So I'll let you pass it back to Adam again. I know he has more to say too. Go ahead.
So the question that I had for you, and so I think if I recall correctly, that there's a very clear belief that I don't know whether it's at Chelyabinsk or up in Novosibirsk at one of their labs that they are having testing that produces yields. Now, not a weapon yield, so it's not 4 pounds of plutonium. We're talking, micrograms producing yield. Is that accurate? Is it, can you maybe talk, because for the listeners and for the average American, they hear nuclear testing and they think we're going to blow up a warhead, and that's what Trump was saying that our adversaries are doing, but that's not what they're doing. Can you maybe fill us in some more, Jim?
Well, first of all, I don't know what's going up there. I'm not a part of the intelligence community, but I will say that, we in the United States, first of all, we do a lot of testing. I just want to make sure you understand, the audience understands. We test a lot of components and look at the effects of nuclear weapons and performance and safety and reliability of nuclear weapons using a variety of tools that are done by the national labs. And maybe we'll get back to that. But to your point, Adam, there are ways in which you can analyze how the effect of a nuclear weapon material will perform under the conditions of the explosion. Because that's really what, when people talk about explosive tests, they're talking about, well, do we know that the criticality condition is going to be such that we know that the performance of this weapon is going to be exactly as we want it to be, if we're looking at it from a military aspect, or from a safety aspect, that, we will not reach criticality at this certain point. And so, to Curtis's point, you can do very, very small, tests where you can cause a fission event or a fusion event. We do that. At the Nevada, out at the National Ignition Facility, we have micro pellets, and they've been increasing yield all the time. Micro pellets of deuterium, tritium, and they compress them with lasers instead of compressing them with conventional explosives or whatever. They compress that material till they get fusion, and they get a fusion burn, and that fusion burn produces a yield. So it sort of is a sleight of hand in what you mean by nuclear yield. I actually liked the 4 pounds, requirement that was in the past, because it gave us at least a limit on the size of the test, because I had going to go in a sort of a silliness here, but at one time when we were at AFIT, we had a DT generator. What did it do? It took deuterium, we hit a tritium target, and we got fusion. And I had a massive concern from people saying, "Oh, you're doing nuclear fusion inside your building." It's like, we produce less yield from each one of those events. I think you had to have, trillions of these events to occur before you put out the energy output of a match. So, can they be done? Yes. The problem, I think the problem we have when we start talking about these explosive chambers, and I'm going to go back to that, is controlling a very, very small yield of a weapon in a configuration that provides explosive, a nuclear explosion in a way that provides an advancement in the design and development of the weapon is what these treaties were designed for. Like, okay, we've got the weapons, we know what we have, no new designs, nothing new, no new performance measures. And our adversaries are seeking that. They're looking at more performance, more ways in which we can design the weapon to overcome their adversary, us. We look at the effects and saying, well, how do those effects occur? How can we survive those? Let's put new materials, new ways of developing it. But when do you get a new weapon? And that to me is the problem, is sort of the tension in the room. And it's always been in tension in the room. And as Curtis said, we've we've sort of handcuffed ourselves and saying, well, we're going to stay far away from that in developing a, quote, new weapon. I remember way back in the day when Kurt and Adam, I think you and I talked about this one time on a podcast. We talked about the reliable, robust warhead. Was that a new weapon, or was it just another use and configuration of the weapon? And that was a major treaty issue for the United States. And we tried to stay so far from that because we were afraid our adversaries might think we're doing something to cause them fear. And my view is, we have to know what they're doing, whether it's happening, whether our intelligence is telling us they're doing these explosions or not. We don't know. The other issue, and this is really what's concerning to me when you see what our adversaries are doing and why I think we need to make such declarations, is if they're advancing their nuclear weapons in ways that we cannot monitor. We do not see an output. We don't see a seismic event. We don't see venting. We don't see those other pieces of that. What are they doing, and what are they doing to the stability that we have in our nuclear weapons deterrence effect, keeping us from having, an advantage from one side? Because once someone thinks they have an advantage, the world becomes insecure. And so you look at that doomsday clock. To me, it's not about the number of weapons. It's about the insufficient weapons on one side or the other. That's when the doomsday clock should start cranking to wherever the doomsday clock grows. I think the doomsday clock's a silly thing. But anyway, going back to that's just my personal opinion. The more weapons we have is not the problem. It's the fact that we have, someone has an advantage, one side or the other. I would rather us have the advantage. At least we believe we can control that. I mean, we may not. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, our government is perfect and pure and, as a snow. But I believe history shows that when we had the advantage, we never conquered other countries. When, we could have done that in 48 or 49. Shoot, we could have started nuking everyone, been the only ones left. If we wanted to, well, maybe. But you know what I'm saying is that history, and that's why I think Curtis's point here is extremely valid, is what are our adversaries doing and why does a declaration like this matter? I want to flip over. I hopefully answered your question, Adam. Did I mostly? I got to be sensitive in some areas.
Yeah. I mean, that was because it seems as though that there's this broader misunderstanding of exactly what's, and I think we can probably say that the Russians are producing a small yield. And so therefore, that's the yield that President Trump has been told about.
Yes.
Although how specific that information that he's received is, we really don't know. But, the challenge is, go ahead, Jim.
I agree, but it's a very fine point in what you're, even when I read the treaty about producing a yield, as I said, I had a DT generator that would, produce, a fusion event inside of a building by accelerating one into the other. Is that a fusion yield? So are we breaking a treaty with that? Well, we weren't, and, from a material standpoint, especially uranium and with plutonium, where do we make that piece? Where do we make that transition? And the United States has been shy to get even close to that in our testing regimes. And I feel that our adversaries do the opposite, as Curtis says. We will push that limit until you tell us niet. And that to me is the issue, because when, to the public, and hopefully our public understands as they're listening to us here, is that we're all doing testing. This is why I think it's important to understand we're all doing some sort of testing. The question is, what is the purpose of that testing, and how does it change the balance in the nuclear weapons design, development, and use to provide an instability which will lead us to a nuclear war? Because that's what deterrence is supposed to do. It's supposed to keep us from going to war, and you keep that by not getting out of that balance. So
I got you.
That a little better answer there. Yeah. And so those sensitivities toward those experiments. When does an experiment become a test for advancing the military yield use? When does the test violate the treaty and creating a yield. And that's why I like those yield numbers. At least there's something you can work with. Because otherwise our adversaries are going to take advantage of every single piece of that. And the United States, whether we, and at least the statement sounds like we're going to turn that off, we have done many things or avoided doing many things that we could do that one would argue meets the treaty requirements, not breaking the treaty, not being dishonest, but we stay away from it. And we got to stop that. We've got to take full advantage of everything we can do, or even drop the treaties if they're getting in the way of that instability. Deterrence is the mission, right? Curtis?
Well, I would say your argument or your observation that the instability is not driven by numbers, it's driven by a perceived imbalance, is actually pretty interesting. I like that. I'm going to have to think about that and articulate that in my own way. And
You're getting in my head, Curtis.
I am.
You're getting in my head.
Rent free, and it's kind of scary. So what I would say here is, so there was a report on November 3rd out of the New York Post that Senator Tom Cotton made a statement that said, quote, after consultations with CIA Director Ratcliffe and his team, they have confirmed to me that the CIA assesses that both Russia and China have conducted supercritical nuclear weapons tests in excess of the U.S. zero-yield standard. So when we're talking about an imbalance, it's more than just numbers, right? It's behavior, it's force posture, it's definitions, it's in this case, it can include testing. Right. And so if one side is doing testing and the other is not, the side that is testing may begin to perceive, rightly or wrongly, that their arsenal is better, more powerful, that the other arsenal is weak, may not work because they won't test it. They're afraid to test it. And these sorts of things. And what this creates is an imbalance in perception that a first strike is impossible to succeed. And once you break that, and one side has the idea that a first strike could work, now you've really created a destabilized situation, however you want to measure it, globally or regionally or whatever. So this is where I'm concerned about this. The science is less no offense to anyone. The science is less interesting to me. I'm confident that engineers and scientists can do this very well. But what I'm interested in is the messaging. Everyone is concerned about the message, what the message will be to the world if we initiate testing to include explosive testing. I'm concerned about what is the message to the world if we don't, and the others do. And what many argue now, like the Hans Christiansens of the world and others, they say that, hey, if the U.S. starts doing this, we'll let the genie out of the bottle, right? And everybody will start testing. Well, North Korea tested in 2017.
Yes.
And no one tested after that. Both Pakistan and India tested in 1998, 2 years into the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, of which they never signed. And no one tested after that, as far as in reaction to or fear of. So, this action-reaction dynamic that is so that is always so worrisome to the disarmament crowd who do not want to see any potential uptick in nuclear activities, especially on the U.S. side. They're less concerned about our adversaries' upticks in nuclear weapons. Just read their stuff. But apparently, it's only if we decide to do it that it becomes a destabilizing issue, whether we go first or go last. But the last thing I think Adam will agree with me on is that whatever example we have tried to set over the last 30 years for other nations to follow in behavior moratoriums simply is not working. They are not interested in following our lead. They are interested in meeting their own interests and goals.
Yeah. One of the things that go ahead, Adam.
Well, I was just going to say on the issue of supercriticality, I mean, this is what I'm trying to get at in terms of these very, very small yields. I mean, supercritical is not inherently a 4 pounds of plutonium. It's a very small amount. And my question, though, and this goes to you, Jim, and I know we're just about out of time, but do we need to produce the same kinds of yield in the same manner that they do, or do we have other means, i.e. NIF, or other testing, part of our stockpile stewardship program that gives us the same data and the same kind of stuff without doing the kinds of, very small explosive tests that the Russians or Chinese have to rely on? Maybe our technology's better.
Well, let me amend that question real quick. Can that version of testing that Adam just described, that is different from everyone else, can it convey the same confidence?
Yeah. So the answer is, and I'll give you the answer from the scientists. And yeah, some people will dislike my answer because there is a lot of controversy in this. And I know at least one person. They've recently retired, so they won't be beat me up too quickly. But the answer to that question is, from the scientists, yes. And in fact, we know more. So we'll go from the big explosive. Now I want to go down to the small explosive testing, because I sort of am gearing toward where we've put ourselves in these tests. So first of all, in the big explosive tests, they were massive systems, massive ways of doing this. For example, we would take a kilometer tube and evacuate it to simulate space. Okay. That was some of the last testing that we were doing in Nevada test site. Now you say, okay, well, a big vacuum, that sounds like space. Yeah, but the neutrons and flying down through that material, it's bouncing off the walls and everything else. Unlike you have in space, where you have, space, it's everywhere. So, what you do is you validate to computer models. And then once the computer models and the physics is understood well, then you can extrapolate or interpolate into areas that you cannot test. Tests were messy. Think of an explosion. How do you know everything that's going on inside that explosion unless you understand specifically what all the pieces are doing? So the scientists that I work with, and heard many, many times, and I don't think I've heard a single one that's involved in this kind of work that will say, we know more because we stopped explosive testing and gotten into the details of the physics and the mechanics and the material understandings and able to model the physics so we understand. So we understand the reliability and the safety of our systems without the big explosive testing, because you can control the environment. I'm a scientist. If I want to understand how something happens, I have to control the environment to test what I'm looking for. And a nuclear explosion is a huge, huge amount of energy. Many things are happening at once. The X-ray systems have to monitor things. I mean, I always talk about Starfish Prime. We missed Starfish Prime not because we didn't expect an EMP, but because we misunderstood the EMP and measured the wrong thing. And so we missed the real important part. And the measurement actually came out because in Hawaii, they, lost their lights. We're like, what the heck? So most tests, when we learn something, is because something went wrong. And then we had to go back and scratch our heads to do the physics, to do the math, to do the computations to find that. So the answer, sort of the short answer to your question, Curtis, we know more about our weapons now than I think we ever would have had if we continued large explosive tests. Okay. But but the chamber tests and what Adam's talking about, and this is the real interesting piece, because it also talks about intel, these small tests where you can control criticality, you can control the measurements, you can control the local environment in very interesting ways, are the kind of tests that do provide details that are very, very important for understanding safety, reliability, and of course performance, which is, what we're really interested in doing. And these tests can be done, on a microdot, in some places. That's what the NIF is. We're doing fusion testing in a very, very small environment where we can control it. But even there, it's a complicated problem.
Okay.
The X-rays.
Well, not nearly as complicated as getting shorter answers, because we're running out of time. So I have one more for you, because we got to hang it up.
Well, we received. You both have to be quick.
Go. Okay. Well, here we go. So we received a comment from a colleague that shall remain unnamed, And I want to get your reaction on air for this, right? And so the comment was, no nuclear weapon designed on the basis of current computer models has ever been tested. No nuclear weapon ever designed by the United States took as long to build as the weapons resulting from life extension programs or cost anywhere near as much. A 20-year development time for the W-93 is scandalous. The weapon is not pushing technology. And during the Cold War, due to testing of weapons developed and deployed was significantly better than the ones that preceded it. None of the post-testing weapons can make this claim.
So
that's a good
let me
point.
First say
that's a good point.
Oh, all right. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. So let me give you, first of all.
Well, you got to do it quickly.
Okay, I know. Well, that's the hard part because it's all in the details. The problem is the details. So regarding the criticality and the effectiveness of the nuclear weapon actually going kaboom, which is what everyone talks about in explosive testing, we are as assured now as we were then on all the weapons that are being developed. I am exceptionally confident on that side. So what are the new things that are going? So why are we having a slow roll in the development of the new nuclear weapons? Well, I'll just pass that back and say, why does it take longer to build a hole in the ground for Sentinel than it did for Minuteman II? It has nothing to do with the technologies or the process. In fact, we have the ability to do it faster, better, cheaper, and stronger than we ever did before. So why does it? Well, it's because of the oversight, the overregulation,
politics,
and the politics of the matter. Get the politicians out of the way. And you're the one that has said, and I can go back to the quote from a previous podcast where you said, well, the Chinese can do it faster because they have, they don't do all these other things. Oh, so their government's better than ours? I'm not sure that's the right
that was
answer,
not what was implied, but it was streamlined.
But it's streamlined. My point is we need to get the government to streamline the important thing, to prioritize what's important. So it's not about that. Timing has a lot to do with all the handcuffs and the additional safety. I mean, we have safety systems and security systems in our nuclear weapons we never had in 1949. Okay? Never.
Yes.
Does that mean our weapons aren't going to work? No, it just means they're safer and we can hand them off to people. Our first weapons we weren't going to give to another country and say, here, put this in a shed and pull it out when we tell you to, and punch these numbers and see what happens. That's a problem that we have in assessing this from just from a faraway standpoint. I'd like to have this conversation. We're having it on air. I'd like to have this conversation on air, so I won't converse with you again. Maybe we can bring that comment up again and have that discussion. I'd love to. I think it's a good discussion, and I think it's because we are doing a lot behind the scenes, and a lot can't be talked about, but a lot can. In terms of this. Yeah, I try to keep it short, Adam. I see you starting to sneer at me there, buddy.
So as we wrap up...
Did I sort of answer your question? Did I at least hit a couple of them?
Yes, you did. So let's do predictions. Okay. Are we, under the Trump administration between now and 2028, are we going to have an explosive test given this guidance? Adam?
No.
I'm sorry, say that again. No?
No.
Okay. Jim?
No, absolutely not.
I say no, but I want to put a caveat on that. But the effect, so we're talking about effects on deterrence. I think this comment has a great effect on deterrence if our adversary believes we'll go there if we need to. It adds credibility to what, if we have credibility now in saying we'll go there if you want us to. The president said so.
I say yes if the Russians or the Chinese do one first.
Is that a challenge?
The problem is, I don't know how President Trump is going to get the money for it from Congress, and to do it quickly is going to take, 2 or 3 times. It's $500 million to get ready. That's the estimate I saw was $500 million, and it could, if you try to do it quickly, it'll be a lot more than that. So this is going to be a hard one, but it was a great topic. So thanks, Jim. Thanks, Curtis. Good topic, good discussion.
Hopefully the list.
No, we're done.
Okay.
You're cut off.
The commute is over.
Cut his mic. So we're gonna have to wrap it up next there. Time. But thanks, guys. I mean, I'm sure this will come up again. I don't think this is the last time we'll talk about it. So next time we'll talk more. We'll have covered the basis and we can go into more detail. So Thanks, guys, and thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on the NIDS View. And as always, even though I'm here in Saudi Arabia, I'm still making sure that we produce new articles on the Global Security Review. Peter Husey's doing Husey events. There's still lots going on. So we've got a book that'll be coming out. So we saw the book jacket for the first time this week, and I think it's called Learning to Love the Bomb, Understanding the American Nuclear Arsenal. That should be probably February-ish. It'll be out for the International Studies Association meeting. So lots of good stuff going on. So stay engaged, send us your questions, and of course, as always, remember to think deterrence.
Thank you for listening to the NIDS View. This show is produced under the NIDS Podcasting Network, a division of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. NIDS is a 501c3 organization dependent upon donations to provide this podcast and bring about awareness of the peacekeeping value of U.S. strength and our national deterrence. You can catch all of our podcasts or provide feedback at thinkdeterrence.com. I would like to thank our producer, Kimberly Charrington, our sponsors, and all the fantastic members of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies for making this podcast possible. Stay tuned next week for another exciting and informative The NIDS View.
The NIDS Podcasting Network.